from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Welcome to the North Idaho College Public Forum. Each year we try to bring you some programs about activities and the life of people in other countries, and from your reaction you seem to very much enjoy that particular topic. We're very fortunate today to be able to discuss yet another such program. We're going to talk about an organization called Global Volunteers, and we're very fortunate to have a member of the faculty at North Idaho College to talk about her experience with this organization in Jamaica and all the exciting things happen, and in fact in the future she plans on going back to continue this work. Our guest is Annie McKinley, who is a member of the faculty, as I indicated, at North Idaho College. She teaches in the Division of Communications, and from the reports we get, is an outstanding member of the faculty, and the students are very, very fortunate to have her to teach in the field of communications. Our guest holds a BA degree from Eastern Washington University in the field of fashion merchandise and a master's degree from that same institution in communications. As I introduced her, I indicated that she last summer was in Jamaica to do work with Global Volunteers. Annie, it's a pleasure as a colleague to have you on our program, and we look forward to discussing this really exciting topic. And I'm very pleased to have back a member of our panel, Lloyd Marsh, who is also a member of the faculty at our institution, teaching in the Division of Physical Sciences. And Lloyd is certainly highly qualified to discuss this topic, as he's traveled extensively around the world and continues to do so each year. I shall ask Lloyd to commence the questioning.
Thank you, Tony. Annie, let's start from the beginning. Can you put our viewers in place with an explanation of what are the Global Volunteers, or who are the Global Volunteers, and how did you get associated with them?
How did I get associated? Now, how I started with Global Volunteers was, it's kind of a fluke, like most of the things that happen in my life. It just happens. It's kind of an opportunity. I was writing an article on volunteerism for a magazine called Careers, and I was talking about how volunteerism helps college students to pursue their careers and how they get, make contacts and stuff. And from that I learned about Global Volunteers, and I pursued it a little more, because one of the things, I wanted to go to Jamaica. About 2 years ago I had a free ticket to Jamaica, and I was advised as a single woman traveling alone not to go down there. And so I thought, well, how could I get there without, trying to find somebody else who wanted to go with me and whatever. So I called Global Volunteers. They sent me information. And one of the first things that I asked, and everybody asked me too, is, do you need somebody to go with you? And they told me right away, they said, no, you're much better off going by yourself, because you'll meet people easier. If you go with your husband or your wife or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or another friend, you seem to stick together and you don't meet the group as well. So that was kind of neat. I thought, okay, I can do that. I can go off and meet these people. And so I picked Jamaica and decided to go with it. And that's kind of how I ended up doing it.
Well, are the Global Volunteers a benevolent organization? I mean, are they dedicated to
Yeah.
what?
Yeah. They're a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to developing or third world countries, and they go into villages that their theory is that a lot of people are leaving the villages. They want to make these people more empowered. So they go into the village and they help them with the project the village needs. But what's neat about Global Volunteers versus some of the other I call it volunteer vacationing, is we actually work with the people. That for every volunteer we have on site, every volunteer Global Volunteers has on site, the village also has to provide a volunteer. So you work with the people. For the money that Global Volunteers gives the village has to have matching funds. So it's a project that we work on together. It empowers the people and it gives them more ownership. Our particular project was, we built a post office down there. And so it was pretty exciting to do. So.
Annie, I'd like to pursue that further, what Lloyd is talking about concerning all the different kinds of projects that Global Volunteers engage in. Is it always construction of
No,
buildings?
it's not always construction. Sometimes it's a teaching opportunity where you would go in. They go all over the world. Jamaica just happens to be one of the places. They have, I think, 4 sites they've gone into in Jamaica. They have gone to Poland. They've gone to Russia. I think they've gone to Czechoslovakia. And in fact, our group leader has gone on 15 vacations with them. either as a leader or in some capacity. And in fact, they have one right here in the States in the Mississippi Delta, which people claim is it's a really wonderful experience. They go down and work in the Mississippi Delta. But they teach sometimes. The good part, I guess, about the project, and for this, Keith, who is our leader, said what's exciting about a project is you actually can step back and say, we did something. Versus sometimes you go in and try to teach English as a second language, you only might be there for 3 weeks, you leave, and you don't actually see what you've actually done. Even though you may have made a difference, it's not as a big an impact. Yes. So, but we also worked on the water system as it was. It's fed by a river, and it goes into just this, looks like a giant hot tub, concrete hot tub. And then there's a pipe that comes out of there that goes down to the village. And we worked on fixing that, which is really interesting. To me, it was just like working on a plumbing problem in your own home. I don't know if you guys understand that it's whatever you touch, something else goes wrong. Yeah, so it was one of those things that we fixed one valve, and while we were fixing the other valve, the pressure backed up too much, and it popped off another valve, which, shut off the water in somebody else's home, which popped off a valve in their house, and it was just like one thing after another went wrong. I said they were probably glad when we quit working on the water system. So, but another thing we did was also 3 of the people did a summer school session with the students, and this kind of really turned out to be more of a summer camp for 3 days.
I think I hear you saying that when you go into the Mississippi Delta or Jamaica or Poland or wherever it might be, that you take a look at that particular area or community and see the different problems and needs, and so there is some flexibility in working on whatever is most helpful.
We went in to Mount Vernon, was where we were, Mount Vernon, and we went in with the post office was what we were supposed to be building. That was what the project, they work with the village before I want to say kind of the leaders of the village get together with them, because they have to come up with matching funds. So you just can't come, right, kind of drop in and say, we're here to build a post office for you. So you have to work with them, and they say what their needs are going to be. And then, in fact, while we were down there, we stopped. Somebody found out what we were doing, and we talked to them, and they wanted a preschool built. So we went and looked at the different possibilities of building this preschool for them.
Discuss a little bit with us how this is different from the Peace Corps. Of course, the Peace Corps comes out of government and is run that way. And I know from what you're talking about matching funds, there's several differences. I guess I have a 2-part question. One, could you tell us some of the similarities between Global Volunteers and Peace Corps and the differences?
Okay. The similarities are you go there to help the people, but we found that the people helped us more than we helped them, we think. And so the similarities are traditionally you go to some country that needs help. The difference is that you only go for 2 to 3 weeks. I was just in Jamaica on a 2-week trip. Some of them are 3 weeks, some are 4 weeks, but traditionally you're only there for 2 weeks. The other difference is we pay to go. We pay $1,300 for the 2 weeks, and part of the money goes to the project. Part of the money, a couple nights we stayed at hotels. Part of the money goes to our food while we're there. We hired a cook and the food. We stayed in someone's home, so we paid them rent for being there. The rental cars, where we went, we had the only car in the village. So it was, the rental car expense was the greatest, I think. You have to pay a $3,000 damage deposit to take the cars out. We didn't get all of our damage deposit back. We kind of hit a few things. So that's where a little bit of the difference. I liked it because Peace Corps is usually a 2-year commitment. My feeling is most anybody could handle a 2-week commitment. I mean, we didn't live in the best conditions. We didn't have running water. We took our baths in the river. It was kind of neat. It was like being in a Tarzan movie. It was a lagoon with a waterfall, so it was a neat setting. I mean, most people can handle that for 2 weeks. If you would have put me there for 2 years, the novelty might have worn off a little bit. But for 2 weeks, most people can handle a 2-week commitment like that, I think, anyway.
Lloyd Marsh.
Can we talk a little bit about qualifications? After you applied to the Global Volunteers, did they screen you for qualification? Are you a carpenter?
Yeah, okay, that's a good point to bring up, because you're better off not being a carpenter. And what they did for qualifications, really, they just want to know that you were kind of not a social deviant, I guess. So you had 3 people had to write you letters of recommendations, and that to kind of check you out that way. That was about the only qualifications. They prefer almost that you not have any skill, because you get down there and the Jamaicans that have the supervisor on site is a Jamaican, and the one we had loved to give instructions. And we were told that the Global Volunteers theory is you're a servant learner. You do things how the Jamaicans want you to do it. you might have a better idea, but you save it until you get home, because they have certain ways they want things done, and you have to go along with it. It's like if you come in there and say, well, I think this is really a better way to do it, you've almost insulted them. Or you have insulted them. Just like, say one of our students stands up and says, I really think you should teach this lesson this way. So we look at it. So you're better off not knowing what you're doing, because they love to give you instructions. So I learned how to mix mortar. And in fact, at our Indian celebration, one of the village elders said that I mix mortar better than most men. So I take that as a compliment. It's going on my resume. The other thing that they were so impressed that I was a college instructor and down there actually working, hauling rocks out of the river, mixing mortar, painting, or whatever it took to get to the water system. You had to kind of scale these rocks and these trails and everything to get up there. And they were really impressed. They said most college instructors would just send the money and they wouldn't actually come down there. So they were really impressed that people with the education would go down there. But our team of 7, almost all of them had higher degrees or that were a little bit older. We had a 17 and 18-year-old that were just in college. So you're better off almost not having any technical skills. We did have a nurse with us, and she went around and did home visits. And so she just went around and checked blood pressure, and she found that a lot of their blood pressure was high because of their diet. So she gave them diet instructions, but that's what she did. She just went around and did home visits.
So you met other people, though, on this
Oh, yeah.
Your team members.
Yeah, this was
that
exciting.
must have been an interesting experience.
Yeah.
You didn't know them before you came?
No, except for there was a mother-daughter team. None of us had ever even met before we got to the Montego Bay airport. And I got into Montego Bay the night before, and I went to the airport, and I was supposed to meet them like at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And we were supposed to wear our Global Volunteer T-shirts so we could recognize each other. And I got there at 3 o'clock, and I waited, and I waited, and I saw no other royal blue shirts. And I started to think that maybe I had just purchased a $1,300 T-shirt, so I was kind of worried. And then I saw 2 other T-shirts come around the corner about 2 hours later. I finally got up and asked and found out that the flights were delayed, which is very common in Jamaica, that flights are delayed. And so, and we all just met, and we got along beautifully. It was a fun team. There was the mother-daughter. The mother was a financial analyst. The daughter was 17 years old and wanted to go by herself, and you have to be 18 to go. And so she coerced her mother into going. They were from Connecticut. They were, I think, the most culture shock of all of us, that they got into the village and goes, did anyone else know it was going to be this remote? So, and then we had a 3rd grade teacher from Rochester, New York, 27-year-old woman, an 18-year-old college student from Colorado. Our team leader is a 61-year-old gentleman, had just been to Jamaica probably a good 10 times on either these type of trips or another type of trip. And who else? Oh, and then the nurse. We had a nurse originally from the Philippines, and she's been in the States for about 8 years, and myself. So it was an interesting mix. And we were fortunate. We all got along well because we're in really close quarters. We were given a home to live in, but the home it might be as big as the studio. And so 7 people, we slept on the floors and in the beds, and it was the corrugated roofs and concrete home. And
let's talk a little bit about while you were there. I mean, you were working in that particular village, and I assume did not travel over Jamaica, but from that experience, and I understand that you're going back
right.
again in the future. Tell us, as one of the third world countries, what your anticipation was before you went, and then the reality itself, how it was different.
I expected it to be real close to what it was because of the different things they told us. I didn't know if there would be running water. I didn't know if there would be electricity. I was real thankful for my background I had. I travel quite a bit. I was in Thailand last year, and I was in Indonesia. So I've been to some third world countries, and I've been in some of the back areas because I have run in some kind of strange places. So I was familiar with what third world living was in a way. I guess I was just open. I didn't have any really expectations. My other background that I was thankful for, I was raised on a farm. So the idea of if hard labor doesn't bother me, to be able to haul rocks and then sift sand and that kind of stuff doesn't bother me. And also I've camped enough. To me it was like a 2-week-long camping trip in a setting that was equivalent to the movie Romancing the Stone. When I first got there I thought, somebody just dropped me into the movie set of Romancing the Stone. It was just so beautiful. And this river just kind of went through the village. The roads were about as wide as a car. Like I said, we had about the only car there. And we had to cross the river 3 times to get to the village. They just build the rivers up with concrete and then just kind of drive through the river. And when we first were going in fact, we asked the turn to get up there, and the police officer we asked, he said, lots of luck getting in, because there had been some really heavy rains. So, yeah, so it was interesting. But I guess I didn't have any real expectations. I was really pretty open.
From that travel, and some of our viewers don't know that you are a runner and you do a lot of bicycling and so forth, and so you not only have traveled but are really a person who's in great condition to deal with life in a different way than many Americans deal with it. But based on all that and your travel experience before, give our viewers some description of what you think are the greatest needs of people in third world countries such as Jamaica.
The greatest needs, it's really hard to say. The building that we did helped them, so they were 3 to 4 miles from the closest post office at that time. And the post office, we're not talking, somebody said that had blueprints or whatever. No, we just it was just 4 walls, a concrete floor, and that was about it. I mean, it was nothing fancy. In fact, it was added onto somebody's home. The postmistress' home was what it was added onto. So it helped them in that respect, because most of them walk to this first village, which is not bad going to it because it's all downhill, but then you have to come back up the hill. And so they walk to this village to do any of their mailing. Their other, the main food that they get from the markets, it takes them an hour in the car to get there. Most of them hitchhike to get there. Most women hitchhike. And then once you get to the market, it takes probably a good 4 hours to do any shopping, which they do on the average twice a week because the refrigeration's not that good, so they always have to do this. So you're taking a shopping trip is a day-long experience if you can get a good ride, depending on how many people you can put in a car. But I'm not probably even in the position to say what they really need. A lot of people will say to me after the experience, they said, were you really thankful for what you had when you got back to the States? And I was real thankful for what I had, but I was real sad for what I didn't have. They live a stress-free lifestyle. I mean, it's not totally stress-free, but it's not, I mean, they don't stress out at things like we stress out at. It's nothing for the village to set up their boom boxes at night, and everybody from the age of 5 to 60 starts dancing in the street. Dancing, and it's just no big deal. And that's the way they kind of like deal with life. The way they work. Of course, the Americans, they said, we got to haul these rocks up from the river. So the Americans go down there, and we're going to fill this bucket to the top. We are going to make as least amount of trips as possible. And the Jamaicans dumped half our rocks out, said, you'll tire too fast. You'll not make it through the day. And so they work smart. They know that, that it's easier to carry 10 buckets than 5 heavy buckets. So they work a little bit smarter than we do in a lot of respects. Their family life is different. And I think that's what you always have to accept, too, when you go to a different country. The value system is different. I talked to one man who'd been engaged for, 7 years. And I said, his name was Lamont, and his fiance's name was Jennifer. And I said, well, when are you going to make an honest woman out of Jennifer? And he said, oh, marriage is a big commitment. Marriage is a big commitment. And I said, but you've been engaged for 7 years? And he said, yes. And I said, how long have you lived together? And he said, oh, about 10 years. And I said, do you have any children? And he said, oh, yeah, we have a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old. And so traditionally, they have children, get engaged, and then get married. And when I told one lady, I said, we do it the opposite. She said, that's very strange. So, I guess you have to be really accepting of, that's their value system and that's how they live, and, and it works out fine. But I also, just the peacefulness of the whole place. Children play in the streets all the time. There's no cars that go through. And if the car does come through, they start beeping about a mile down the road. So chickens, donkeys, and everything else move out of the way at that time.
A very different paced life and different even attitude toward
Yeah, and that's in the village. If you would go to Kingston, you would experience a whole different lifestyle. Just driving through Kingston, you could just feel your blood pressure go up. It's just traffic, and there's a lot more crime in Kingston. You have a lot more drug problems in Kingston. The village doesn't, have the drug problems. But drug problems, what I mean is the drug trafficking and that. So, but the Jamaicans too, they'll help anyone out. I never felt any fear. at all. And we were in this one place called Port Antonio for the weekend. It's kind of a resort town. And I was down on the street for probably about an hour and a half by myself, just wandering around, dancing, and the only Caucasian female around, and never felt any fear. People come up and talk to me, and real comfortable environment.
Lloyd Marsh.
When we talk about the villages, how many people are we talking about? What are the population?
You know, we could never
of those
really
villages?
figure out. We saw lots of kids, but couldn't figure out where the parents were. Because the kids were really wonderful. They always wanted to come out and talk to us. They were very intrigued with us. Many of them had never been able to touch a Caucasian before. At least we assumed, because they loved to touch us. They thought that our skin was going to feel different than their skin. They, of course, loved to play with our hair, and we were laughing about it one day. And then at that same time, we were playing with one of their hairs, and so we said, I guess we're no different. So, but they liked to just to touch us, and so. But I would say the actual village might have had 150, 200 people. And then there's one day we hiked up, and this is the advantage of being in shape. We hiked up the mountain to at 4 o'clock in the morning to observe the sunrise. And the advantage, I said, was because only about 4 of us out of the 8 that went up made it to the top. And then I hiked up further with the guide up to another village that was way up on top of the hill. But they had and then that's where we also would visit farms up there. Their farms are really interesting, a mass of crops of coffee beans and bananas. In fact, the richest coffee in the world is grown in Jamaica, Blue Mountain coffee.
Sure.
And then they've, of course, pointed out a few marijuana plants to us. And,
Of course.
yeah.
Well, do they have schools in the villages?
Yes, they do. They had, at this particular village we were at, they had a school that went through, I believe, the 8th grade. And then after that, they walked the 4 miles down to the next village to go to high school. And so the kids thought nothing of bike. They would bike, some of them, which was pretty amazing, would bike to school, or they would walk, and they would say it would take them an hour to walk to the school. But the kids thought nothing of walking that far. Of course, they loved it when we gave them a ride, but they...
Sure.
Yeah,
But the literacy rate then is pretty high, would you think?
Uh-huh.
They read, write, and of course their first language is English.
It's English, and then followed by, is it patois or something?
Yes,
Yeah.
patois.
Yeah, and they'll mingle that language in. They're very good about when they talk to us. They talk slow in English because they talk very quickly. But but the surprising thing is, I talked to a high school teacher, and he said only 5% of them go on to college. So that not that many go on to college. A lot of farms, a lot of people work in the coffee factories. But also, he said the same problem you see here in the United States. They see him as a college or a high school instructor with a college degree, barely being able to make it. But then they see the drug dealers driving around the fancy cars and the nice watches and stuff. So it's kind of like, which would we like to do?
What are my values?
So, yeah. So, but about 5% go on.
Sure.
Similar problem in lots of parts of the world
Yeah.
about the whole business of the economy and how we resolve dealing with value questions. Tell us a little bit about their political structure of making decisions within the villages or the chain of villages. Policy
I
decisions.
bet I couldn't even really address that. I know that there was about 3 what I would consider community leaders where we were. There was 2. There was this man by the name of Lester, who was kind of our site manager, and there was a woman by the name of Marjorie and her husband, Alfred, which we were fed at their home. We hired a cook, but it was at their home that we ate all the time. And they seemed to be kind of the leaders. They're the ones who would negotiate with us. They're the ones who figured out where they could get the money. They were the ones who went and got the volunteers. But it doesn't seem like there's any formal. If you would say, who is the mayor of the town, I would have no idea. I have no idea who that would be. So I'm not really...
So that it's very much more informal.
Oh, yeah. But they seem to work together very well, and they help each other out immensely. I always was amazed that the chickens would kind of wander around. I'd say, who'd know who has whose chickens? And they said, we just seem to know. It's just say, but it's just that kind of atmosphere, that there's not the possession. You see it in the driving, and that's what in driving down there, they drive on the opposite side of the road, but people don't seem to claim their lane. And here in the United States, it's like, this is my lane. And I don't care if this car is heading on head-on towards me. I'm in my lane, But there, they don't have that claim that if car, they'll move over, move back, whatever it takes to get around. Go over the other side of the road and move around. So it's not that sense of ownership as much as here.
Prior to the program, you were telling a story that I thought was very, very much enjoyable, and I would like for you to share it with our viewers about some of you were in the street and a car was coming and about your dancing. And
yeah, one of the, and everybody says that nobody returns from Jamaica without, being able to stand still after they return, after they hear the music. They have wonderful reggae music, the home of Bob Marley and everything. And so it's nothing for them to, we were in this town one night and it was customer appreciation night. So they put up their speakers in the parking lot and everybody just started dancing, and there must have been 200 of us, and it got large, and so we kind of had to go into the street. And so then the cars would come by, and so somebody would just yell car, and then we'd just kind of dance into the ditch until the car went by. And they would go by at 25, 30 miles an hour. It's like they didn't seem to really care. But it was that's their whole kind of philosophy, that dancing is a big part, and music is a big part of their life. That you may live in a home that barely have running water, and by American standards, we would say was poverty, but it's still is, to them it's a good home. But they'll have one of the nicest boom boxes you could imagine. So music is a huge part of their life, and the dancing.
And I think hear you saying that in addition to their immediate family, that in the village or the small villages, there's an extended family where almost everyone seems to get support for whatever their at least their psychological needs.
It reminds me of kind of how the States used to be in probably about 20 years ago in the farming community. And I still see, I'm from a small farm in Spangle, Washington, and you still see it. It's like when somebody gets hurt and they have to bring in the crop, everybody goes and puts the crop in for them. And that's what you see in the Jamaican villages. It's like somebody, needs somebody to work on the farm. So everybody goes up there and works on the farm. Or somebody needs the kids. I never figured out who took care of the kids, but it just seemed like everybody just kind of took care of the kids.
It sounds like what you're saying too. And I've had this impression from other people we've interviewed that travel around the world, that when you get into an urban center or a large population, everything changes. You get a much more structured, rigid form of government, and how people are much more specifically delegated certain responsibilities.
Yeah. I think, too, you see it in the villages. You wouldn't see fences. I mean, you don't have to see fences that this is my property and that's your property. You just don't see that. I couldn't figure out whose property ended where. Every once in a while we'd be walking along and they'd say, oh, you're on Mr. Anderson's farm now, or you're on Mr. Farley's farm, but I would never know how they could figure out why we were in different farms or whatever.
But they lived there long enough to where they did know and understand that.
Yeah. So that sense of ownership. One of the other exciting things that happened to us, I think, is we introduced popcorn to the village.
I must, on that note, interrupt.
Okay.
I have a signal we're out of time. Annie McKinley, thank you very much. You have been most informative, and Lloyd Marsh for your fine questions. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that you've really found this program fascinating, and I'd like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time, and we will discuss yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Telemedia Services on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.